I never expected anything like this to happen. My stepsister Serena had always been a part of my life, but we never crossed any boundaries. We shared a home, shared meals, and lived in the same space, but there was something about her that always lingered in my thoughts. She was beautiful, too beautiful, maybe. I couldn't help but notice the way she moved around the house, the way her laughter echoed through the halls, like it was a signal that everything was normal. But things weren't normal. The more I saw her, the more I began to feel something I shouldn't have. She had this effortless grace about her, the way she held herself, the way her eyes glinted with a mischievous sparkle when she smiled. There was an air of confidence around her, one that I couldn't quite understand. And the worst part was that I didn't want to stop noticing her. She was always there in my peripheral vision, and whenever our paths crossed, something inside me stirred. I'd tell myself it was just a passing thought, something superficial, nothing to take seriously. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept coming back. I'd catch myself staring at her when she was talking to someone else, or when she was standing by the kitchen counter, casually sipping on her drink. I felt guilty for even thinking about her in that way. She was my stepsister, for crying out loud. We were family. It wasn't supposed to be like this. There was an undeniable attraction growing inside me, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it was there staring me in the face every time I looked at her. I didn't know how to deal with it, and I sure didn't know how to talk about it. The tension between us grew, and I could feel it every time we were alone. Something was changing, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. She wasn't the same Serena I had known all those years ago. There was something different about her now. She'd begun to notice the way I looked at her, the way my body stiffened whenever she got too close. And she didn't look away. She didn't pull back. Instead, she seemed to almost welcome it, though I wasn't sure if it was intentional or not. It was like this unspoken connection was growing between us, a force I couldn't escape. The more I tried to fight it, the stronger it became. I tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was changing. Something was about to happen, and I couldn't stop it. One afternoon, it happened. I was in the kitchen making a quick snack when she walked in. Serena was always there when I least expected it. She leaned against the counter, casually chatting, but I could feel her presence like a heavy weight in the room. There was an unusual energy between us. She wasn't talking like she usually did. There was a certain tension in her words, something I couldn't quite place. As I stood there, preparing my food, she came closer. Her hand brushed against mine as she reached for something on the counter, and for a moment I froze. It wasn't just a casual touch, it was deliberate. She lingered, her fingers grazing mine, and the air between us felt thick, charged. I wanted to pull away, but something in me didn't. That moment marked the shift, the point where everything changed, and it felt like I was losing control. I could feel my heart beating faster, louder, like it was trying to break free from my chest. I wasn't sure why, but that touch, that slight contact, triggered something inside of me that I hadn't been able to ignore for so long. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stayed close, and the silence between us grew heavier. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was confusing. I couldn't figure out what she was thinking. Was she playing with me? Was she aware of what was happening? For a split second, I considered stepping back, distancing myself. But I couldn't. I couldn't take my eyes off her, couldn't move. It was like I was trapped in a moment I didn't know how to escape from. Serena's gaze met mine for just a fraction of a second, and in that brief exchange I felt a rush of emotions: excitement, fear, confusion. She didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes. She knew. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the moment passed. She pulled back slightly, her hand leaving mine, but the tension lingered. She smiled, but it wasn't her usual carefree smile. There was something deeper behind it, something that made my stomach twist. She seemed almost aware of the power she held over me, and it unnerved me. It wasn't just physical anymore, it was psychological. Serena knew what she was doing, whether she meant to or not. I couldn't shake the feeling as she casually walked away. The air felt different now, and I knew nothing would ever be the same between us again. Things started getting out of hand after that. Serena's presence in my life became even more constant. Every time we were alone, there was this unbearable tension in the air. She'd find excuses to be near me, to touch me, to laugh at my jokes a little too loudly, and every time she did, I could feel my heart racing. My thoughts became clouded with confusion and guilt, but also a deep sense of longing that I couldn't ignore. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself it was just a phase, that I needed to distance myself, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. The more I tried to suppress it, the stronger the feelings grew. I should have told myself to stop. I should have kept my distance. But I didn't. And one night, as we found ourselves in the kitchen once again, things escalated. I had been in the middle of something when I heard her footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around immediately. I could feel her getting closer, and the warmth of her body pressed against mine as she stood next to me. I should have stepped back. I should have moved away. But I didn't. Her breath, soft and steady, grazed my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. She leaned in just a little too close, and my body tensed. It wasn't just her nearness, it was the way she was looking at me, the way her gaze lingered on me, almost as if she was waiting for me to make a move. But I couldn't. I was frozen. The air around us was thick, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my chest. I wanted to pull away to end this madness, but the pull toward her was too strong. It was like I couldn't control myself anymore. Then, without thinking, without any warning, she kissed me. It was brief yet intense, and in that moment, everything that had been building between us came crashing down. I could feel her lips against mine, soft and warm, and I couldn't pull away. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a betrayal. A betrayal of everything I had known, everything I had believed in. The world seemed to stand still as I kissed her back, my mind spiraling into chaos. When we pulled apart, the silence in the room was deafening. I didn't know what to say, and neither did she. But in that moment, I realized something that I had been avoiding for so long. This wasn't just about attraction. It wasn't just a mistake. This was something deeper, something darker, and I was trapped in it. We were both trapped, and there was no easy way out. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't look Serena in the eyes. Every time I passed her in the house, it felt like she was hiding something I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But the weight of what had happened hung over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't shake the guilt, the shame, or the confusion. How could I let this happen? Was it all my fault? What did it mean for our family, for my relationship with my parents? Everything felt broken. The thought of confronting her made my stomach churn. What was I supposed to say? How could I possibly explain the mess I had gotten myself into? The distance between us grew. I couldn't be around her, not without feeling that strange tension pulling at me. And yet, at the same time, it was like I couldn't escape her either. Every time I tried to move on, to act like everything was fine, I'd find myself thinking about her again, replaying that moment in my head over and over. It was like an obsession, a compulsion I couldn't break free from. The guilt was suffocating, but I couldn't push the memory of her touch out of my mind. It haunted me, the warmth of her hand, the softness of her lips. What made it worse was that Serena acted like nothing had changed. She was just as carefree as always, as though nothing had happened between us. It was as if she was pretending it hadn't happened, pretending we could just go back to being the way we had been before. And part of me wanted that too. I wanted everything to go back to normal. I wanted to forget what had happened, to erase the mistake from my mind. But every time I saw her, every time I was in the same room with her, I couldn't escape the weight of what we had shared. I wanted to tell someone, but who could I trust with something like this? My stepsister, the one person I'd always thought of as a sibling, had done something so intimate, so wrong, and it felt like I was drowning in my own feelings. I couldn't talk to my parents about this. How could I? They wouldn't understand. They wouldn't see it the way I did. They wouldn't understand the confusion, the guilt, the twisted attraction. All I wanted was to forget, to pretend it hadn't happened. But the more I tried to push it down, the more it consumed me. And the worst part was that I knew Serena wasn't going to be the one to bring it up. She was acting like everything was normal, while I was the one who felt like I was losing my grip on everything I knew. It was like I was stuck in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Days turned into weeks, and things seemed to return to normal, but the quiet tension between Serena and me was impossible to ignore. She'd pretend like nothing had happened, like everything was fine, but I knew better. I could feel it in the way she avoided my gaze or the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. We were both trapped in this secret, and there was no escaping it. Every time we crossed paths, there was a heaviness in the air, a silent understanding that neither of us wanted to acknowledge but couldn't ignore. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the guilt anymore, it was a deeper, gnawing unease that settled in my chest. I found myself watching her when she wasn't looking, noticing the way she stood a little too close to me, the way her eyes flickered nervously whenever we shared a space. She wasn't as carefree as she used to be, and neither was I. The connection that had once felt so electric now felt suffocating. I didn't know how to act around her anymore. Every word we spoke to each other felt forced, like we were both pretending to be something we no longer were. I had tried to move on, tried to bury the feelings deep down, but they kept resurfacing. The memories of that moment, the way her lips felt against mine, the way she had kissed me like it was something we both needed, it haunted me. I would replay it in my mind, the image of her lingering close to me, the way the world seemed to slow down around us. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a moment that changed everything. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. And neither could Serena. But we never spoke of it, we never acknowledged the truth. Instead, we existed in this strange limbo, where every glance, every moment of silence, spoke louder than any words could. It was like we were both waiting for something, waiting for the inevitable, for the time when the secret could no longer be kept hidden. But neither of us was brave enough to face it. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to let go of her. Part of me still longed for the way things had been before the kiss, before the guilt, before the betrayal. But I knew deep down that it wasn't possible. What had happened had already reshaped everything. It had reshaped us. The bond we once shared had been shattered, and no matter how hard I tried to repair it, nothing would ever be the same again. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and in the quiet moments when it was just the two of us, I could feel it, an invisible wall between us, one that we had built together but couldn't tear down.